I'm grateful for the chance to be a part of this. Certainly, this is my wheelhouse. And grateful for the presenters here today. I feel very indebted to them. I think Dr. Weiner, I've seen him several times presenting, as well as really got to know Guy Sutherland, who came to our presentation, and I know him from the community and all the work he's done at Providence Farm. So is our new tour principal and assistant superintendent for operations at our campus, amazing, extraordinaire, and serves as a liaison to our New Trier Parents Association, and grateful for them and their partnership. I've done these a couple years in a row, and I feel really grateful for our past of being able to give back to not only just our parents, but also hopefully support them in their own parenting and talking about really difficult topics and conversations. Dr. Weiner is a clinical author, consultant, national speaker on issues related to addiction, prevention, treatment, and public health policy. Listen to Dr. Aaron's podcast. It's Let's Talk, News, Science, and Mental Health, highlighting episode 35 on preventing youth substance use. And we also have Guy Sutherland, and also I forgot to mention, Dr. Weiner is a New Trier alum. So grateful. And jump to the next slide. And Guy Sutherland, I just have to move our little Zoom people. Guy Sutherland, who is a New Trier alum and currently works as a director of residence life at Providence Farm, a sober living home on the North Shore. And he is featured as an episode 113 of the Success is Subjective podcast, The Fast Track, and Why It's Not All That It's Made Out to Be. And obviously, I'm a New Trier social worker. I've been at New Trier for over 20 years. I am a certified drug and alcohol counselor, and I've worked with many students and through the Mental Health Advisory Board, our prevention work, doing QPR, question, persuade, and refer suicide prevention, certainly bringing in speakers on substance use, our mental health first aid, and other prevention-related efforts that go along with the conversations we're going to have. And just kind of what we're wanting to do tonight. We have taken a lot of your questions that you shared, and you can continue to share in the chat. One of the things that, and maybe Denise I'm having to hide different things to make sure. So if I miss something or somebody sees something in the chat, to make sure you jump in, if you could, Dr. Weiner or Guy. Certainly, we want to cover a lot in a very short period of time. So please know that we want this to be an exchange, a discussion, even if it's through a webinar. And I'm appreciative of these topics that you've all submitted, and for us to kind of go over them, even if it's in a brief format for an hour and a half. So I want to share, just to set the tone and give you some perspective of what it might be like for our kiddos. In thinking about what kind of we know that our kids have different, experimenting, risk-taking things that happen. It's all part of life. It's all part of, being a young person and, thinking about and managing self-expression. And so we know that there's practical things that we expect as a school, as a community, as a parent, and thinking about those things that might be risky, which obviously substance use is one of them. And one of the pieces that we are grateful for is you do the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. In 2025 was our last one that we did, where we had 2,772 students participate. We were able to gather data over since 2002 to be able to show trend data, whether it's grade level, gender, national data comparisons. And you can see here that we are above the national average for alcohol and below the national average for marijuana, prescription misuse, e-cigs. And some of the trends that we're seeing, while we're above the national average for alcohol, post-COVID, our rates have gone down. Prior to COVID, we were at 43%. So we think it's really important for you to know that we have done a really good job. You have done a really good job at having conversations, having that something's working, right? Not only our education at school, but really within your home as well. And some other trends that we're seeing, I shared on the corner, just recently in the last 3 months, caffeine pouches is something that has come on the market. I'm hearing that kids will say, "Oh, it's safe." It is not regulated. Caffeine pouches have high concentration of caffeine, which can create some toxic reactions. So that's something that we have. It's just recently popped up in conversations with kids. And then nicotine pouches, something that maybe you're familiar with, Zins or other products that have been trending that are it's really can be concealed within their mouth and be able to conceal and consume obviously high rates of or high amounts of nicotine. When we think about kind of going forward, we are able to ask on our youth risk survey. There's 6 areas of adolescent wellness, so we are able to cross-tab, which is great. And in addition to that, we also asked 2 additional questions, and that was really important to us to be able to ask about stress and stress impacting their students' functioning. And we asked the question because we thought it was like, okay, kids are talking about, maybe the question on the YRBS talks about suicide and sad and depressed, but we really want to know, what are our kids experiencing? And while stress is very normal, very typical, we expect that, we really wanted to understand a little bit more about, are there other cross behaviors or other things that may be impacting them with regards to alcohol or mental health or social media and stress. And so you can see students who have used, like, let's say, reported use of 30-day use of alcohol also reported stress 6% higher than non-users. It's not a causal relationship, but it's something to note. And we know that teens sleeping fewer than 8 hours showed a 2% increase in reported mental health concerns, as well as substance concerns. So in each of these categories, I wanted you to know or see that social media use and mental health stress impact can have, and you probably know this, that it can have a significant impact on your kids, and ways that we can build in those protective factors is how we can address some of these and be able to give them more information, like digital literacy, education around lowering the impact of their stress. The other thing we're seeing too is we're able to find out more information about trends with regards to mental health and our national data. So our national data, while we're below the national data for mental health in the areas of, we asked the question of in the last, I think it's 12 months. Why am I blanking? Yeah, in the past 12 months, did you ever feel sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks in a row and you stopped doing your usual activities? Seriously considered attempting, making a plan, or an attempt? And while we're below the national average, any of this information is always concerning to us as educators, and continuing to look at how we support kids and teens. And the other part of that is that, we continue to see lower and lower rates of students, at the point where they're attempting, which has gone down significantly. So I think it's all about early intervention and prevention. We know that mental health is a part of some of our kids' lives, that they have diagnosed mental health concerns or challenges, but it's how we begin to early intervene. And one place where I am so proud of our family resources in our community, being a very research-rich community and being very well educated on mental health, we have, when we ask the question about whether a student is seeing a social worker, therapist, or psychologist or psychiatrist in or outside of school, 29% of our kids are. So we know that that is helping for those that might need additional support. And we talk about one of the things that it's interesting, oopsies. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate. Actual versus perception. We also take specific questions from our Illinois Youth Survey, IYS, and we're able to ask questions that we can compare to our actual data. So our actual data says, let's say alcohol is 27%. Kids perceive, so they perceive that so like the idea is that how many times do you think a typical Nutra student did the following? So 81% of our kids think that everyone is drinking, but the actual is only 27%. And Dr. Weiner is going to go into this later, but I wanted to share that data so you have that in context to what he's going to specifically talk about. And then this slide really talks to, you have a lot of power. You may not think so sometimes when your kids are resisting and talking to you about or challenging you, like, Mom, you're the only one, or Dad, you're the only one, or, that, doesn't want me to use or drink or whatever it may be. But you are the number one external reason why kids choose not to use substances. That's what they shared with us. And then the other part that they said was also a reason is their own goals, values, and future. So they have their own stake in it, which is incredible that they're sharing that with us. And we can use that to be able to help them to understand why we have want that no use message for them. That clear expectations are one of the strongest protective factors. And perceived parental approval, I think this is a powerful data point, is that students are 5 times more likely to use a substance if they think their parents approve of underage anything, any use. So that tells us that if you're really clear, they are less likely to use. And then there's a perceived risk of approval. That question is, how wrong do your friends feel it would be for you to? So 83% of students say that their friends disapprove of underage drinking. And it's interesting because I think probably your kids say, no, they're doing it, or it's fine. And so in our data, they're really reporting that they think their friends would not be okay if they did that. And perception of risk, it says how much do you think people risk harming themselves if they, and we pulled out the moderate to great risk. And so 66% of students perceive a moderate to great risk of harm to people who use, and that alcohol, binge drinking, 72%, and marijuana. So in setting the stage, I think that information is it just is really telling you that, one, that not everybody is doing it, and 2, there's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't, because they're even telling us in data connected to their peers. So Dr. Weiner is going to speak to and share his slides about breaking the hurtful cycle.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to steal the screen share. I think it's up. Someone flag me down. All right, folks. Well, so we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology behind substance use amongst young people, and then potentially where you can intervene. We're going to be very ambitious in what we're trying to cram in about 15 minutes. So if we don't get to all of it, or if you have questions, feel free to save them, or rather you can enter them in the Q&A tab, and we'll answer them at the end, or feel free to email me at aaron@weinerphd.com. But I will cut straight to the chase. When you see a young person acting in a way that seems counterproductive, there's always a reason behind it. And that includes substance use. It could be anything, really. But we as humans tend to be pretty pragmatic internally. We don't do things that aren't worth it to us. And so if from the outside you're looking at a behavior and saying, why in the world would you choose to do that? There is an answer to that question. And oftentimes the answer is emotional, which is why we don't see it from the outside. There's a why, but it's hidden. And a lot of forms of unhealthy coping stem from emotional discomfort. So if you think about emotions as being on like a spectrum from like really negative to really positive, and when things get to the really negative side, like fury and clinical depression, panic attacks, chronic anxiety. So it's not just like I'm feeling tense, it's like I'm really stressed out, or having tics, or et cetera, et cetera. That's when you start to see all of these compensatory behaviors, things like tics or addictive behaviors, eating disorders, hoarding, cutting behavior. All of these are strategies that a young person is employing, trying to feel okay. Or the second main reason is trying to fit in. That's a part of it too. But they're just trying to feel okay. But the strategy that they're using has a lot of negative side effects. In the moment, it might feel like it's working, but there's a downside to it. But our brain, the animal side of it really likes that immediate gratification. I think we could probably all relate to that. There's a part of us that really likes it when we feel good right now. And so even if they're engaging in a behavior that might cause problems relationally with their parents or disciplinarily with the school or whatever it is, they're in that moment, they're being accepted by peers they want to be accepted by, or in that moment, they're not feeling the stress the way they used to. And that is very powerful for that part of our brain. And you can really conceptualize behavior, generally speaking, as being the tip of an iceberg. That's what you can see. What you see is the behavior, but beneath the waterline, there's a lot of feelings and needs that drive it. And so when we think about this relationship then between mental health and substance use, we usually think of it going in this direction, where someone's feeling stressed out or they're feeling depressed, they're feeling lonely. And so substances are a solution to that, but it actually ends up also going the other way, because when people start getting involved with substances, it creates more problems in their life. And ultimately it's this snowball bidirectional relationship where substance use causes mental health problems, mental health concerns can lead to substance use. I like to think of addiction, broadly speaking, as a metastasized coping strategy. Generally speaking, someone is trying to feel okay, and the way they've chosen to do that has really taken over their life because probably wasn't sustainable from the beginning. But because of that, supporting mental health is critical to prevention. It's oftentimes the why behind use. And when you look at studies and statistics of kids, you see this repeated over and over and over again. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of this. This was a study looking at cannabis use or THC use more specifically. And if you look at the top reason why kids endorsed why are they using it, it was to cope. And you'll notice actually number 2, which I didn't draw a box around, is social influence. Top 2. If we go over to vaping, also very common with young people right now, to relax or relieve tension. That's on the far left there, was the number 1 reason. And even if we talk about video games, why do kids who have video game issues use video games? This was a study that was examining it from a couple of years ago. All of the dots that are furthest to the right, and that's the ones that I've read circles around, are all related to some form of emotional coping. That top one is escape, coping, fantasy, escape. It's always this theme over and over and over. I want to feel better, and so I'm going to use this form of immediate gratification to get there. So the way that we intervene, and more on this in just a minute, and I think we'll talk quite a bit more about this evening, is what if we give kids another way to accomplish that goal without the downside? How do we do that? As well as how do we start to shape the social ecosystem that they're living inside of? That graph that Kris showed of norms was so important. Like kids, like 80% of kids are like everyone's drinking, and the number is actually 27%. And for the other substances, it was even less. But the gap between those bars was so large. And that's called is a descriptive norm. So there's 2 different types of norms that influence our behavior. A descriptive norm is what we think everyone's doing. If you think that 80% of kids are drinking and you're not, that makes you the weirdo, even though you're actually part of a pretty strong majority. And that was true for each substance that was on that slide. Each substance, kids thought most people are doing this, even though the opposite was actually true and very few people are. But that creates this pressure to conform with a fantasy, like an illusory issue. Like it's not even there. But for a number of reasons, social media influence, a number of things, they think it's omnipresent. It's not. Injunctive norms is the other side of the, if descriptive is how many people you think are doing it, injunctive norms are how bad are other people think this is going to be. Like, if I drink, how are people going to react to this? If I use someone else's prescription meds, how are people going to react to this? And if you feel like there's going to be a consequence, you are less likely to do it. And so it's tough sometimes to influence norms. It oftentimes takes large messaging campaigns or really trying to work on the culture of a student body, for example, and how they perceive things, but you can influence them. And you can also give accurate information at home, because what kids are hearing and seeing is something very different. And we see this across a number of different areas. Like when you think of nicotine, for example, vapes are, and we could go way down, into this rabbit hole for a very long time, but vapes are marketed at young people. And not only are they being marketed at young people, but studies are showing that the strength of vapes is up about 3 times what it used to be from 2017, and the capacity is up even more now. The capacity is up about five times as much as there was back in, or actually I guess 6 actually, is particularly for the disposables. So they have these extremely strong, extremely large vapes that just simply weren't there before. Alcohol is absolutely being marketed in ways that appeal to young people. Right, Mountain Dew, although there's no caffeine in these because that is actually illegal to do. I don't know if anyone remembers Four Loko, but when those were, a bunch of people died from alcohol poisoning because of those, because when you're caffeinated, then you don't pass out when you're supposed to. So you can continue to drink and then you kill yourself. So there's no caffeine in here, but Mountain Dew appeals to young people. And that's why they have their own branding around a hard drink from Mountain Dew. And if you look at what's being sold in dispensaries, it's incredibly potent and is being marketed in ways, again, that appeal more to like afternoon delight. I just this was just the front page of a dispensary. I'm in the northwest suburbs now. I'm an alum, but I'm out in Long Grove now. But the Mundelein dispensary, the THC content here, 38%, 32%. To put this into perspective, the THC content in marijuana flower, which is what you smoke, back at Woodstock all the way until the mid 90s was like 3 to 4%. So that 38% flower is like, what? It's been a long time since I've been in school, like 8 times, like eight times what it used to be. That's maybe 32, I guess. So 8 to 9 times. So that would be like having 8 or 9 joints from the mid 90s that you're smoking at the same time is the same as 1 joint of Animal Face that you can buy out of a dispensary right now. It's a very different product than what it used to be. And what kids vape, or anyone vapes for that matter, is even stronger. Like this is a 75% THC vape. This is a 93% THC vape. So it's not what kids think it is. I thought it was very interesting as well on the data that Kris was showing that kids felt it was less harmful to use THC products than to use alcohol. Which says to me there's a lot of education left to do. I don't think that there's an understanding around that, particularly, and again, big rabbit hole we can go down around this, but particularly for the developing mind, THC absolutely is harmful. And so the question then becomes, what can we do to support our kids? And I know that's why you're here tonight. You're all taking time out of your evenings. I'm sure you're really busy. To learn about this. How can we help our kids? You want the best for them. And we'll go deep into this. I have a couple ideas here to start us off though. And the first one is you've got to be connected to your kids in a way that feels emotionally safe to them, because if they don't feel like they can share things with you, they're not going to tell you what's going on. And if you don't know what's going on, then you can't do anything about it. And an acronym for fostering emotional safety that I think is fantastic. I didn't make it up myself. It's from the Center for Motivation and Change. It's communicate with love, which stands for listening, offering, validating, and empathizing. And so I'm going to go through each of these again briefly. Ambitious amount to fit in 15 minutes, but we're going to try. But listening means active listening. So listening doesn't just mean listening and not saying anything. It means making eye contact, tone of voice that sounds like you're engaged, but also asking open-ended questions. An open-ended question is one that shows that you care about someone and their answers, because it's not just a yes or no answer. You're asking about details, like what's going on. What are you seeing around you at school right now with vaping, for example, would be something that you can ask. Like, have you seen this in bathrooms? I hear sometimes it happens in bathrooms. Is that your experience? Like that open-ended question, right? Is the difference between asking, did you have a good day at school, versus what was the most interesting thing that happened to you at school today? Second one is open. First one is closed. The second thing that you can do to show that you're listening is reflect back what you're hearing, either emotionally or in terms of content. So if your child seems frustrated, reflecting that back and saying, oh man, that sounds so frustrating. Um, that shows that you're hearing. And even actually, if you get it wrong, even the fact that you tried will resonate. You know, they might correct you, and that's okay. You tried. So active listening, show that you're listening. The second one, and this one's really important, it can sometimes be really tough for us as parents. I've got two kids of my own, but is how do we offer advice? And it can be very tempting to just tell your child the right answer, quote unquote. Like this is what you should do. But that tends to not work so well because they might say what you want to hear and then turn around and do something different. And so what you can try instead is what's called give advice through a feedback sandwich, where you sandwich the guidance between two metaphorical slices of autonomy where they get to make choices. And so the first piece of that is asking permission. So saying, hey, I have an idea that might help. Do you mind if I share it with you? Which might feel really weird to say if you've never done that before. But what it does is it means they get to say, sure, go ahead. Yeah, I'll listen. And then they give consent to hear what you have to say, which is the opposite of mom or dad jamming something down your throat. You literally just said, okay, tell me. Don't ask, by the way, if they don't have a choice. You know, that feels pretty terrible if you give someone a choice and then take it away. But if you can do that, then you offer the guidance. And then afterwards, you ask how they felt about it. And you can even say, like, if you disagree, tell me, like, I want to hear it. But as long as it wasn't terrible advice, they'll probably say, yeah, no, that makes some sense. Like, I think that could potentially work. And what we know from research is that if they say, please tell me what you have to say, then they listen and then they agree with it out of their own mouth, that goes a lot further than you just kind of standing up, you know, like on your high horse and preaching or something. That doesn't tend to land as well. So if you've never tried a feedback sandwich, give it a shot. It tends to uptake better. Validating means validating the emotion behind the behavior. So even if you can't endorse the behavior that your child might be doing, you can at least understand where they're coming from. And that's a huge component of emotional safety. That your parents get you. Like they get it. Even if there's a behavior that needs to be shaped, they understand the motivation. Because again, it's usually really understandable. You want friends. You want to feel in control. You want to feel relaxed. Like who doesn't want that? You can connect with that before getting to the part where behaviors have to change. And E is for empathizing, which, to borrow a phrase from Brene Brown, if you've ever seen this video, if you haven't, Google Brene Brown empathy. It's a good 3 minutes. But she talks about if someone's in a dark hole, they oftentimes just like want to not be alone in that hole for a hot minute, right? Get in there, listen to what someone has to say, be there with them. Don't just tell them how to fix their problem, because that can actually feel disempowering. Instead, can you join with them, maybe validate their emotions, listen actively, and then offer a feedback sandwich? Tends to go a lot better that way. So that's where emotional safety comes from. And the last piece of this, though, is to have persistence and don't get discouraged about it. It's something that, particularly if you don't have this type of relationship with your child right now, it doesn't form overnight. It takes some repetition. We trust through consistency. Like when someone's consistently trustworthy and safe, then we feel safe with them. So if this is something that you're building from zero or having to dig yourself out of a hole, keep at it. It gets there eventually. So last couple slides, I'm going to go pretty quickly through this again. I don't want to hog all the time, but I want to put these out here. The slides, if they haven't already been sent to you, you'll get them. So no worries that we're going quickly. So some actionable steps that you can take: stay connected. Know the signs of possible problems. I'm just going to throw all these up here right now. There's a lot of things that could possibly be a sign that a young person is engaging in substance use of some sort. A lot of times, though, you'll see it touch multiple areas of life. They might have some struggles at school. You might find that like they're not close to their old friends and you haven't met their new friends. We tend to surround ourselves with people who endorse our behavior. So you'll oftentimes see that mirrored in others, particularly kids do. You might find that things are more strained at home. And then there's a number of signs that I think kind of speak for themselves that I have on the right side that might be related to different substances, signs of it, either like hiding vapes or marks on the body, changes, in physical appearance. A lot of times kids communicate with their wardrobe. So if it seems they're trying to subscribe to a certain subculture that's very involved with substances, for example, that could be something to watch for. But no single sign means like, oh man, like now I know that you're getting high all the time, or now I know that you're drinking, except for like say like a positive drug test or finding alcohol in their room. Then that's a little bit more likely. But otherwise, it's this pattern, right? That they're engaging in this regularly. The second thing that you can do is talk early and often with your kids. Phrase again, I didn't make this up, but I think it's very appropriate, is that 61-minute conversations are more impactful than one 60-minute conversation. This isn't about like having the talk about drugs and alcohol with kids and then not doing it anymore. Ideally, this is something where it's normal to check in about, ask what's going on, ask what they've seen. You saw this news article, or you watched, Big Vape on Netflix, and now you're interested. It can be something that feels normal to talk about, as opposed to like, oh man, mom, dad, she's like coming at me about drinking again, or we had to sit down. You don't want it to be like that, right? It can be something that feels more normal to talk about because you've normalized it. One thing that you can do again is set accurate narratives. Here was that slide that Kris had up that was showing that huge disparity between the amount that is actually going on. I mean, a third of kids, right, felt that they thought 37% of kids were misusing prescription drugs. It's 3%, right? That's like 10 times. There's these huge gaps. Same thing with vaping. So they thought 76%. I think 76% of kids are vaping. 7% of kids are vaping at New Trier, which is great, by the way, and lower than national average. But setting these norms is really, really important and goes a long way. And the other part of this, which looks like I deleted by accident, I apologize about this, is that there's a lot of data that show that many parents actually think that it's helpful to serve alcohol to your teenage children while they're at home. Like, I'd rather you have this experience while you're at home and while I'm here than for you to have that at college or to do that. We actually have a lot of data that show that that is counterproductive. And actually that permission structure, much less the legality of providing alcohol to minors, it actually sends the opposite message. And when you look at studies, and there are many that look at this, the kids who have had those experiences are more likely to have alcohol problems at college and beyond than those that don't, where their parents set those clear boundaries and say, there's a reason why you're not allowed to do this until 21 for your health, for a number of different reasons. We strongly prefer that you don't drink. That actually does not lead them to go wild at college, statistically speaking. So again, each family, each parent has to make their own choices, but it's just something to know that statistically speaking, it is counterproductive to either permit kids to drink at home or to serve them alcohol. Again, much less that actually is against the law. You can encourage healthy coping behaviors rather than or encourage healthy coping behaviors. If they're engaging in this behavior, there's a reason for it. So we've got to give them a better alternative and reward the behaviors that you want to see. A lot of times when kids are involved with substances, the parents get really focused on that. And it's like either you're in trouble or it's neutral and you're still in the doghouse. And it's not to say that there shouldn't be consequences for behaviors. For sure there should. But the most positive tool we have for shaping behavior is positive reinforcement. That's the most powerful one that we have. That's how substances work. Kid drinks, they get rewarded immediately. So they want to do it again, right? So if we're not using positive reinforcement, we're leaving our most powerful tool behind or ceding it over to the other side of the street. You want to be very consistent with both positive and negative consequences. Learning happens through structure. If you are in a marriage or a partnership, make sure that you're on the same page, because inconsistency there just completely undercuts what you're trying to achieve. And take care of yourself in your marriage, if you're in one. Your partnership, if you're in one, your kids pick up on it. If you're struggling, they feel it. If the household is tense, they feel it. It flows down. That makes it a heavier burden they have to carry. And again, the number one reason why kids use substances is to cope with feelings. So as much as we can have that home environment be healthy, stable, it's a good thing. So to sum everything up, our kids need our support now more than ever. They have a very heavy burden on them now emotionally. Sometimes I think back to when I was a kid and all the things, like I didn't have to go through the COVID years. Sexting didn't exist. Chasing likes on social media didn't exist. There's all sorts of stuff, cyberbullying didn't exist. All these things now the kids have to contend with. They really need us. And problematic substance use is a maladaptive coping behavior, either because of feelings or because they're trying to find a social group and that feels like the only way in. They're more accessible now and actually more potent than in the past as well. So we have to be careful and give kids accurate information so we can foster emotional safety as parents. We can know the warning signs of problems, talk early and often, and take consistent steps to shape behavior. So thank you again for following along. I know I feel like a little bit like a used car salesman sometimes when I'm trying to go fast. So hopefully it wasn't too blurry. Again, drop me a line if you have any questions that we don't get to answer tonight. And with that, I'll cede the mic.
I agree. It's so hard to get everything in, and you want to make sure we give as much as we can. And I appreciate too when thinking about all the things you're saying about how to partner with parents and being able to share that your information out with them is really helpful. And I hope the same for parents, for us, is that feeling comfortable in coming to the school for help. I think sometimes parents feel fear or stigma or concerned about getting in trouble or things like that. And that's not it. We have a wealth of resources to be able to provide for you. And I think Guy can be able to jump in and talk a little bit about just your own narrative, but also what you are doing now and the experience and journey that you've had and what it was like for you at New Trier and then beyond and your resilience beyond. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Kris. I think yeah, I guess to start with, I'll start with my experience at New Trier. Um, was I was a very like I guess normally you could say sort of successful kid. I took, level fours and I played football and basketball, and I think on the surface everything looked good. And for the sake of this conversation, I started drinking, and I think my going into my junior year. And For me, it was very much like a social lubricant. It was fun. A lot of my friends were doing it. And I, I sort of, it was, I progressed to where, I started smoking my senior year. But for my parents, it was known, but it was not something we talked about. Like they did not really address it with me. I was lucky in that I never really got in trouble. Um, but I went through New Trier. I went to college, and I think to some of the stuff that Dr. Weiner brought up, when life got hard, and I had some events occur. What I knew how to use as a coping skill was drugs and alcohol, and so I think that's where like I turned to, and unfortunately for me that happened my junior year of college, and my dad would say I blew through the guardrails pretty quickly, and got pulled out of school, and began my journey to recovery. And unfortunately, it was not quick, and it was not linear. I spent a good chunk of my 20s kind of in and out of different treatment centers. I went to Wilderness, I went to all these different spots, but ended up getting sober out here at Providence Farm about 6 years ago, and began working there 5 years ago, and so that is what I do now. I help run the day to day, and I think um, for this sake of this conversation, like I also work with individuals outside of that, like a lot of kids in high school, and through Providence Farm, and through that, I think so much of what we see is a lot of what Dr. Weiner's talking about is like the conversations that parents can have or don't have with their for us sons, and how impactful that is. Like when that is pushed or swept under the rug, which is I know what my family did for so long, and the impact that that can have once that happened um, was something that was extremely um, impactful for me. I think we see so much of what we do at Providence Farm is not just the work with the individual, but the work with the family. We require that as part of what we do. Christine, you talked about stigma, and that is something we are battling very actively within the community at North Shore. You know, um, I know for me that was something I experienced within my family, and you know, 10, 15 years ago when I uh started, it was like the narrative was there's a lot of shame around like what is guy doing, what is guy struggling with, and it's like, oh, he's going to a leadership camp, and then, no, and I think the implicit messaging there to me was pretty negative, right? It was that like what I was struggling with um wasn't something that was really talking about, and it required us to hide it, and that has obviously changed, and I think that's something we're working on changing, and I know I feel very passionately about. But I think I'll be quick. I'm looking forward to getting to the Q&A, and seeing what some of the parents have to say.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I just saw one question come through. So I wanted to throw it out to Aaron or Guy. It is there a difference between substance use and abuse in teenagers?
I mean, I think it depends on how we're defining things. I think so. The way that I look at it is largely about risk and consequences. And I think for me, when you're talking about a developing brain, and again, there's a lot we could talk about on that subject. Substance use is a high risk activity when your mind is still developing. It's also oftentimes illegal to do, and that creates even more risk around it. And so, like the term abuse is actually a bit of a, and I don't mean this in a negative way towards you, Carlos, but a term we don't use as much anymore because it's kind of it's hard to nail down and also sounds like violent in a way. So we try not to go there. What I will say is that there's a lot of using substance use for as someone certainly under the age of 21, and actually earlier than that you go, the stronger and worse the impact is biologically on the brain. Um, it's just not a healthy idea. I'll put it that way. So for adults, we talk about substance use versus misuse, or abuse would be the older term for that. As being use is something where someone is using it and it's not generating problems, or it might be lower risk. Whereas once you start getting into either a misuse or abuse or a substance use disorder, that's more a clinical terminology about in a number of different areas, but a lot of it has to do with causing problems in your life. So it's kind of a longer answer, but hopefully it got to the heart of what you were asking there, Carlos.
Just
Okay.
quickly, I think what Dr. Weiner talked about at the end, like whether it's substance use abuse, the difference is the fact that starting as a teenager, just the harm, and so many of the guys that we get at Providence Farm that starting at 13, 14 years old, and the damage that can do, whether it's using uh, frequently or infrequently.
One thing I'm noticing, and obviously use trends go up as students get older, right? So, experimenting a little bit more with alcohol and things like that. And I think there's something that Dr. Weiner, you talked about is like, what do we do? Like, for example, after parties. We have a dance coming up, and after parties, as you know, Guy, and also Aaron, being a Nutri alum, that there's a lot of conversation around not so much the dance, but the after parties and who's hosting, and a lot of anxieties around that, even for prom or grad parties, or we talked a little bit about post high school plans, whether it's college and being concerned about, preparing your kids for college, but also like, what do I do now to help them in going forward in college? Do you all have any thoughts, a couple different ideas around that and how to parents have those conversations?
I do have thoughts, but I feel like I go first a lot. Did you want to go first, Guy?
Hey, you go for it. Lead us off.
All right. Well, so the first thing that I'd say is that like if it's like 2 days before prom and you're just having this conversation, it's a little late. It's something where planning is everything, right? Planning is everything, and how a young person approaches those sorts of environments has a lot to do with how they see the paradigm, right? Like, is this something that I want to do? Is this something that I want to introduce into my body? If someone else around me is engaging in a certain behavior, is that something that I also want to do? For sure, like particularly once you get to college, alcohol will be around, vaping will be around, THC will be around. And the question is, what choices are they going to make and what values will they be acting in line with? We tend to feel best when we act in a way that is consistent with who we want to be and how we want to act in those types of situations. And so if they haven't clarified that in their own mind, if they haven't had conversations about that, if they're just kind of like shooting from the hip, like that's when either implicit or explicit peer pressure starts to kick in, right? Like, oh man, I don't know how I'm going to handle this situation. I don't know what I'm going to do. And now there's pressure on me. Everyone else is around me doing it. And I don't want to be that, if they go into it knowing like, I think a lot of other people might be engaging in this behavior. I know I don't want to, and I know why, and I know how I want to handle it, then the chances of them making that choice in that moment are profoundly greater. I think there's also then that other layer of should they even be in those locations, right? At their age, would you want them going to those after parties? I think that's a different layer. And again, every parent has to make their own choice about how that works. But I will say that if it's something that you're concerned about, or you feel like they're going to an environment that's not going to be safe, uh, you have every right to move them to places and require. I know that's hard sometimes with teenagers, but it's okay to say it's my job to protect you until you're 18. Whether or not it's on your phone, whether or not it's in any situation, right? Including parties where you might not be physically safe in one way or another. That's your job as a parent. And sometimes that does mean that there's hard decisions to make. But even if you do take more of the stance of they need to be able to navigate these environments, I think it's okay for them to go there and for us to debrief afterwards. It's not just about the debrief. It's about how you've prepared them to go into it ahead of time. That'd be my 2 cents.
That's one thing too. I even hearing from my students that the potency rate, so when students stop using or they have a violation and they're having to go through some education program, we're talking about no use. What I hear is the cycle of what kids are telling me with this high potency marijuana use, cannabis, that they're describing that cycle of it just started with a little bit and it was fun with my friends, and then they started using it. Well, it's kind of fun. Kids will tell me that they're using it because it's something to kind of a incentive if they get all their work done, and at the end of the night it's no big deal. Now they're doing it alone. And then they're saying, well, I do it to help me to go to sleep. That's a common thing I might hear. And then the cycle of that is, well, I feel super anxious, so then I'm just going to keep using it. But the hard part is the high potency cannabis use is making kids more anxious. And the other thing that I haven't had as many kids most recently in the last couple of years, but the idea of using that much high potency cannabis use, they often have stomach pains. So it's called, quote, pot pains or hypomesis syndrome. And kids are ending up in emergency rooms, or parents are constantly taking kids to the GI doctor for concerns. And it may be cannabis related. So those are things, just in thinking about a no use message, there's some things to educate around if they have started to use or you're talking about use, but that it's not just, well, it may be something fun. We also learned today that and learning about it's also something that may make them feel better. And there's a lot of risks involved in that, especially like Dr. Weiner said about past cannabis, and marijuana that was at 20% or less than to what it is right now in dispensaries, but also where kids are, getting their weed. But I think the other part that is really important is digital risk and AI. And what I hear from students is feeling like people are pretending to be someone else. I hear at times people are calling people out online and um, and having those things being said about them. So a lot of cyber stuff. I'm hearing at times students, kind of doing these deep fakes, putting their information out there. Um, even the whole video gaming has become a big thing where they start to buy things. The whole gambling piece is something that is really big and coming to the younger levels, high school or young adult levels of, gambling and things like that and gaming. So I think it's something to think about, not only just having a plan, like we're talking about, like Lisa D'Amour talks about hot and cold conditions. When a cold condition is having conversations, like Dr. Weiner and Guy talked about, how do you have these conversations? Maybe you didn't talk about these things, but having conversations maybe in the car or when you're walking the dog and making it really breezy, but talking about like what's happening, and sometimes you don't say, what are you doing? But what are your friends kind of doing? What are you hearing? I'm hearing a little bit more about video gaming and buying things online and raising the stakes so they can get more players to be able to fill their game or their experience. So I think it's important just to kind of talk through that. Our young adults in college age, it's one of the highest, I guess the increase of rates of gambling have increased at the college level. So it's something just to kind of know a little bit more about and start to have those conversations like you would with substance use about digital safety. On here that you think we missed, Dr. Weiner or Guy?
I think what I want to stress, and I got at this a little bit in my answer too, is that the question, like, if you think about your own choices, when you ask yourself, like, when you're presented with something new and you have to decide, like, do I want to do this thing or not? A lot of times there's like this gut check of like, does this feel like something that I would want to do? And why or why not? Like, does it resemble the sort of things that are how I define myself, the permissions that I give to myself? Like I tend to be like a rule follower as generally as a person. Like I generally stick within those lines. So if someone was like, "Hey, you want to go like spray paint a wall somewhere?" Like that would be like a pretty quick pass for me. Like that's not something that I would want to do, because that doesn't fit with like my view of who I am and my identity. And so, like, when I think about protective factors, about the messaging, how we help kids shape their identity, really helping them be in that place where they value their physical health, where they understand the potential implications of using these substances at young ages, and if they have their eye on the future, for example, and the things that they want, and can connect those two things together, that engaging in this behavior might jeopardize that, might have an impact. Then when they're faced with something novel that they might not have seen coming, that's what they lean back on. I think that's the ultimate protective factor to me.
And another question, what are the common over-the-counter or prescription drugs that kids may misuse?
Hmm.
I think it kind of varies, but I think what I hear the most of when kids are saying they're misusing is Adderall or stimulants is really what I tend to hear if that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think for especially prescription drugs like Vyvanse, Adderall, anything like that. And I know for us like cough medicine, for over the counter, anything with DXM in it is also commonly um misused. And then I think another thing is what is available now in like gas stations and
Oh, yeah.
smoke shops, which young kids have the ability to go to, is I have trouble keeping up with it. And that is, obviously another avenue in which um young people are able to um misuse stuff as well.
Hmm.
Thank you for saying that. I think they call it gas station heroin, and it starts with a T. I'm totally,
I mean,
I'm
That
not,
there's,
one, that one's teen eptine is what that
yeah,
okay.
one
yeah.
that one's called. But yeah, no, I actually have a whole presentation that I do on what I call gas station pharmacology, and I
That's
actually
so
Mm,
made this.
wild.
I made this little picture here. I'll share it real quick. That just kind of encapsulates it for me, which
Mhm.
is like this is this is what's going on at gas stations right now. Um, just echoing your point, Guy. The over the counter drug that's misused the most is dextromethorphan,
Yeah.
DXM. That's the cough syrup. You chug a bottle of that, and it's a psychedelic.
Hmm.
That's the way Robitussin works. So if you take too much of it, so like that's probably the most common, but it really is. I mean, if you're whether or not you're tianeptine is an opioid. Kratom is an opioid as well. Actually, that both of them are unregulated. You can get big tanks of nitrous oxide at almost any vape shop. They keep it behind the counter. That's another thing actually for kids in particular that's very common. You see more nitrous oxide use amongst young people than you do even college age and beyond because again it's for whipped cream, so there's not even like an age requirement on selling it. If you know where to buy it. So there's we could talk a long time about what's available, but really it's just this question of like how do we help kids make thoughtful decisions about these sorts of things because it's all around.
mhm. Yeah, especially the canisters. I live in Wilmette and I saw a couple on the ground. And, usually don't you see often see the disposable vapes and things like that around every once in a while. But that was something that last year I was hearing a little bit more about it. And then I saw a couple canisters on the ground. I'm like, okay, this is something that, it's easy to access for kids.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I think my microphone's working.
The
Loud and
fire
clear.
alarm did it.
Well, and I'm at school and I had to attend to an incident. So I'm sorry I had to leave the screen. But I want to make sure we share NTPA was a supporter of this program tonight. So really appreciate our Nutria Parents Association helping help us identifying programs that are really important to our families and community. And thank you, Guy and Dr. Aaron. Wanted to thank you guys so much and Ms. Hummel for all your work in supporting students and individuals through their journeys with addiction and making good decisions. I think it's we certainly being in a school. It's a time where our young people are developing their independence while trying to guide their connections with their friends and I think as parents and caregivers, you all play a critical role in helping students make thoughtful and responsible decisions. So we appreciate everybody being here tonight. Is there anything else, Kris, Guy, or Aaron, you would like to say here? I think you've covered so many of the questions that we had, even from the parents that were coming in that came in before the presentation.
Yeah, I did see that one more hit the Q&A.
Oh, there you go.
Um, yeah, it's a question about drug testing and should we have
Mm,
Narcan in the house? I don't know.
Mm.
Guy, you want to go first to take this one or?
Uh, you can go. I mean, I think if they're the Narcan thing is specifically like tricky nowadays. I know from talking with a lot of our guys that are coming in. I don't if there is a chance that they are using substances like I don't think it's bad. So many of our guys have had encounters where they were smoking or using some drug that they thought was fairly innocuous, but it was laced with fentanyl, or a friend of theirs, and it ended in just them having an adverse reaction, not necessarily something tragic, but just like it happens. I, th I safe than sorry, I guess, is kind of where my head's at on that. I don't know if you have something else, Dr. Warner.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with you. Um, I think the last time I saw a statistic on this, and it's been a while, but I'd assume it's probably pretty consistent, is that something along the lines of 80% of kids who overdose do it either in their house or in a friend's house. If you have it around, then in the case of an emergency, you're prepared. The other upshot about it is that you can pretty much get it for free these days from a lot of different places, including like the local health department. So, it's not a hardship to keep some around. I honestly like I carry some in my bag just all the time because why not? It's small, and if I encounter something, I can do something about it. So that would be my thought on that. And in terms of drug testing, that one's tricky. I really think that that's like a per family decision. Um, I know some people like to do it. I've heard of some families doing it proactively, where it's like once you go to high school, we just do this, randomly at some point during the month, no matter what, because the fact that it's there means that if you're in a situation where it's offered to you, you can be like, my parents are crazy and they drug test me all the time, and so I can't do it. And it like gives them an excuse and a way out, as well as a detection mechanism. It can, however, when done reactively, undermine trust, which is something, that matters. And so unless there's a lot of reasons why you don't trust your child to be honest with you in particular, or you've got evidence to believe that they're lying to you, the downside to saying, like, I'm not going to trust you at your word and I'm going to test your urine instead, that might be greater. But that's why, again, it's a very personal family by family decision. I think if you're having an active problem, that also is different than if you're trying to do it preventatively. So that was kind of a cop out non-answer, but it's complicated.
But also, you shared the continuum in many ways. I feel like with my parents that have kids really struggling, it's a tool of many, and sometimes it's being able to hold them out to see if treatment can happen more locally, or the continuum, not having to go residential and doing more of a partial day and seeing how it's going, all those different variables. It is tricky, different for every kid. And that's why there's a treatment team, right? Or people working together and making those decisions with you so they're not alone. And regarding the Narcan, I keep it in my bag. I have one in my office. Obviously the nurse's office has that. We have Birdie Light, which is a doctor that has he lost her child to a misuse drug overdose and of fentanyl. And she really speaks to the idea that in a lot of pills, they have traces of fentanyl in them, and wanting to educate around that. And we're fortunate in this community. I think it's every single library has Narcan, so anybody can access that if they needed and wanted it free. And also, I think Evanston has different boxes around that has Narcan that anybody can gain access to as well. And sometimes it's not about the kids. It's about adults coming into the building or anyone else. And then obviously, the prevention around it, right? So we do a lot of prevention and education around it. So one thing is, I just wanted to say, talk to like-minded parents. I think sometimes you feel alone in a vacuum, and also setting limits that to other parents. Parents may host, parents may allow it in their house, but letting other parents know that you don't want your child to use or to drink or whatever, whether it's at an after party or anything else in their home. And also talking with like-minded parents is to talk about how, sharing resources with one another and what are you doing or how can we can really be helpful and and supportive. And then obviously we want you to contact professional. If you have any questions, you can contact one of us. There's this literature is just a snapshot into some of the things. And obviously our Nutria website that has mental health resources and my information and ways to contact social work if needed. It's all here.
Yep. Thank you for being here tonight.